You're listening to DruidCast episode 188.
I got my ride, I kissed my lass on the Merseyside, ahoy there Captain Crow. Of all I've seen and all I've done upon that ship, of course I will tonight. The barren sea and almost free, a fortune out tonight, ahoy there Captain Crow. Temptation struck and I was rocked. The captain's order, my bad luck. Overboard I had to go, or ordered Captain Crow. And I was robbed, captain's daughter, my bad luck. Overboard I had to go, what did Captain Crow? I skipped a ride on a motor's back. Navy found me, cut me slack, ahoy the Captain Crow. Highways and byways and good days and sad days, but travellers I have known through the sun and rain and snow. Highways and byways and good days and sad days, but travellers I have known through the sun and rain and snow.
Hello my friends and welcome to DruidCast episode 188. I am your host Dave the Bard, and DruidCast is brought to you on or around the 20th of the month by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. If you want to find out more about the Order and our courses, you can do that on our website, which is at druidry.org. Opening the show you heard the Dolmen and Connacht with Captain Crow, taken from their new album Celtic Giants. And well, if you're familiar with the music of the Dolmen, you will know that it's an album filled with amazing songs. Available now on streaming platforms, and also I'll be placing links to all of the artists featured on the show in the show notes. Well, I hope you had a wonderful Yule and New Year. We had a pretty quiet one here, and to be honest, that is exactly what was needed. But now 2023 is underway, and I am back to pour some glorious magical wisdom into your ears via the conduit of your favourite podcast device. We've got some great things planned for this year, and they kick off right away this month with an interview with Lavanna Morgan. Raised on the sacred Isle of Anglesey, now living in Devon, she has been a witch for decades and has just had a book published called A Sea Witch's Companion, Practical Magic of Moon and Tides. During the interview, we talk about her life on the island and what drew her to work with the moon, tides and the sea. So, grab your cuppa, my friends, and I will see you on the other side of the interview.
The Talkie Bit.
I'm here on Zoom with Lavanna Morgan. We have known each other for decades, it seems. Yes. But we've never kind of sat down and had a good old chinwag about you and your path and what brought you to your witchcraft. And so maybe to start off with, let's start there. So how did Lavanna become Lavanna? How did Lavanna become the witch that I know and have known for all these years?
That's very intertwined with talking about the sea as well.
Okay, well, that's good.
I think where I'll start is I spent my childhood, most of it, in Anglesey, which should be a place very well known to Druids, I reckon, and lived by the sea from a very, very early age. And I'm telling you that because when I was in my teens, without being in contact with anybody else who did anything pagan or magical, I formed a very close relationship with the moon and spent a lot of time watching the moon, became an art student. I'm very old, I should say. So this was in the mid-1970s when dinosaurs still stalked the earth, I became an art student, and I was also starting to learn at that time about the women's liberation movement and about goddess spirituality, which was just in its infancy in this country anyway, at that point, feminist spirituality. So as a fine art student, the subject for my work became the moon and my own bodily cycles and time cycles. And I thought that was like an artistic investigation. But what I couldn't have guessed was that wonderfully it led me straight back to my roots by the sea in Anglesey and straight into witchcraft in a working alone spiritual way. So it all came from there. So everything I did came from the love of the moon and the sea, and a very conscious process from the age of about 19 of making my own bodily cycles coincide with the lunar cycle and living by a lunar calendar. And that just led me very deep into spirituality. And to have contact with any other witches, I remember reading, I read Alan Garner's books as a child, and for all of my life, Moon of Gomrath will be one of my very, very favorite books. And I went to a very booky kind of school, and at the age of 12, I read The White Goddess because it was listed in the back of Alan Garner's
Right.
Moon of Gomrath, in what I would later come to know as a bibliography. So I thought, well, if it's there, I'll read it. So, I mean, it was a struggle, but it kept referring to the old religion. And being very alone, this is incredibly daft, really. I formed the impression that it had died out and I was the only one left. So I didn't even look for other people. I just got on with it. And to cut a very long story short, I had an extraordinary initiatory dream about Ariane Rod, who was something I had known since childhood as a figure in stories. And I began to seek out other women in the goddess movement in my 20s. I was very involved in the anti-nuclear movement in the mid-80s and the spiritual aspects of that. And at the beginning of my 30s, after working alone and thinking there was no one else, the penny dropped and I realized there were lots of other people out there. And I called out inwardly for others to work with, had a series of dreams in which I was rowed over the sea to an island where a group of witches were waiting for me, and in very short order was put in touch with my Wiccan initiator, the fabulous, sadly no longer with us, George Hereward Wake, and joined his coven.
Right.
And that's how it all unfolded.
When you were on Anglesey, how much of an influence did the stories of the Mabinogi have on you growing up? Were they myths? Were they seen, or were they taught in the schools?
Hugely. No, they weren't actually taught in quite that way. I think I may be a bit of a dying breed in that when I was a small child, we didn't have television. We didn't have television largely because television kind of didn't work very well in Anglesey. The transmitter system was just not very good. And, you could watch Irish TV perfectly. And some friends of ours had a TV and used to watch RTE from Dublin, but
all right.
That was a mystery to me. So I had a childhood without telly, and I had a childhood that was full of making up your own games, and the games that were made up were all about those stories and those myths from the age of 3 or 4, really. But they were also, at that time, what I would come to call later a sort of plethora of local spirits and presences that everyone talked about.
Right.
So, and one of them was an extraordinary character called Madame Wen, Einir Wen.
That's a great name.
Isn't it? The pirate queen. And I didn't discover until I reached adulthood that she was actually a character in a Welsh language novel written in the 1920s. And we learned about her at school, but I didn't really understand that she was a fictional character. And she was a white lady who walked on the beach at night. And, the kids would say to each other, if you go on the beach at night, Madam Wen will get you. And I used to see her.
Oh.
From the age of 4 or 5, I used to see Madam Wen.
Yeah.
And I used to have little chats with her.
Right.
So that was the beginning of my relationship with Arianrhod, really, although I didn't know it at the time. Yeah, and the Mabinogion was the cultural background, but there's lots more. I'm sure you probably know, there's lots more about the characters in those stories that is in Welsh culture and poetry. It's like a background that gets referred to. So that was there.
It was there, right.
I have to say, when I got to a certain age, my parents wanted me to go to school in Manchester because I thought that would be better for me. Because, for all sorts of reasons, but so I had to do that. So I'd be, and go home at the weekends, not very far. But so from the age of about 11, I was a bit more separated from that.
Yeah.
But only a bit, really. But it never went away. And by the age of 15 or 16, my favourite place was a place again that you may know called Bog Clodiad de Gowres.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the village I lived in, Rosneigir, I now think was really extraordinary. At the time, I thought it was just the kind of place where everyone lived, And on to the northwest of it is Llancerrig Bach, which is the place where one of the largest hoards of Iron Age objects found was discovered. And it was actually discovered by a lovely man who I knew as Willie Roberts, and he lived next door to us when I was little.
Wow, really?
And he used to
with
tell
his tractor, wasn't it? It was his tractor.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a whole other story which we could talk about. It's quite a long one, though. And on the other side of the village was Bog Clodiad de Gowres, which is one of the most significant megalithic sites definitely in Wales, but also in the Albion bit of the British Isles. So that I was between those two things, and they used to go and sit on Bog Clodiad at night and watch the moon rising over my magic holy mountain of Ereifol on Llyn.
Wonderful.
That was
your landscape that you grew up in. Wow.
And of course, between those two places, out in the sea, in Dinas Dinlle, and somewhere between Llanddwyn and Llyn is the site of Caer Arianrhod.
Yeah. Yes, out to sea there. Just on low tide, you can just about see the little peaks.
Just about see the reefs. I've been by it in a boat. Yeah.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a magical landscape. And you know, when I was putting my Mabinogi albums together, you know, to go to the place that gave birth to those stories was so important, you know, to really get in touch with the spirit and energy of the tales, really. I'm really tempted to ask you to tell me the long story about it.
Well, I can if you like.
You can't say that and then.
Okay, so we Mr. and Mrs. Roberts lived next door to us, and they were lovely, lovely, lovely neighbours, really kind-hearted and good. And Willie and actually his father, whom everyone just called Tide, which means grandpa in Welsh, used to look after us when we were little kids. And they were sort of, the road that where we lived was like the last road before the sort of land that's sort of sand dunes. I don't know what the other word for it is, and another word for it in English, but it's nearly sand dunes and the sea, and the houses that are there now hadn't been built then. And we used to sit on this little sand dune, and Willie and Tide used to tell us stories. It was just, they just looked after us, 7 or 8 kids from, you know, the families in that road. And he used to tell the story of how he found the objects at Llyn Cerrig Bach, and he was working for the council, and they were building the runway at what is now RAF Valley, and it's all sand dunes. I mean, that landscape of Tywyn Trwan, which is now lost but relict, is just extraordinary. It is quite like Llanddwyn and Newborough Warren, huge area of sand dunes, and they were digging peat out of a number of small lakes, big ponds, really, to spread on the sand so that they could put down the concrete surface of the runway. And the way he told it was this, that they had a tractor attached to a baler thing with chains, and they were pulling loads of bales of peat out of the bog and leaving it on the side of the bank there to dry. And the chain broke that attached the tractor to the baler. And he thought, oh my goodness, or words to that effect. It was wartime. And this is the way he told it. Then said, you know, it would have been really difficult to get a replacement because you have to go all the way to Llangefni, which is maybe like 15, 20 miles away. And there was petrol rationing, and it was really difficult. This was just going to stop the work. Dreadful, because they were working under pressure for the war. And he looked around, and lo and behold, there's a bit of old chain in the bog. So he attached it to the tractor, and it worked. And it worked that day, and it worked the next day. And towards the end of the next day, out popped the Llyn Cerrig Bach hoard. And he'd been using a piece of Iron Age chain to pull the peat out of the bog. And at the end of telling us the story, and this was always the favourite bit, he would say, and here is the chain, because Sir Cyril Fox, who'd excavated that site, allowed him to keep that piece of chain.
Wow. Oh, really?
So at a very young age, you know, about 5, I held this piece of chain.
Wow. Amazing.
He was a lovely, lovely man. And his daughter, I'm not sure if she's still with us, actually, Evelyn. She was very protective of his memory, and she has had for many, many years gone round and given lectures to school children all over the island about him and this great story, and would borrow objects from the museum. She had wonderful talks.
Yeah.
So that's the story. It's actually, I don't know if you've been there, but you know, you can't see very much there at all. It's and I think later they feared that some of the objects that were found might have gone under the runway and be lost for good. But I think it's pretty clear that they think they got everything there was out of there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pilgrimage for me and Kerry. Whenever we go to Anglesey, we go to, Llancerrig and oh,
I used to ride.
Bryn Celli,
As a
yeah, those
I
places.
used to ride my pony, a little pony, when I was a kid. Everyone did round there, and I used to ride. My favourite ride was going right along the big long beach and then inland past Llancerrig.
Amazing, and when I first went there years ago, there wasn't even a sign.
No.
It was just to find it. It was incredible, and it's right next to, like you say, the RAF base. And occasionally they'll take off, and there's this. But when it's quiet and it's peaceful, there is definitely something magical about that water.
There absolutely is. There absolutely is, and not just the water, but the rocky outcrops around it, which are hard to access now because they're within the perimeter. Of the RAF base, but it's it's a very, very special place.
Very special place, and I don't know if it's true, but I've heard it said that the items that were placed or thrown into to the lake as offerings could well have been offered into there around the time when the Romans were attacking the island, and Boudica was doing her thing.
Some of them are older,
right,
and some of them are from that period.
Yeah,
I've obviously studied it quite a lot, and that's one of the things that's very interesting is it does go back further. So it's a record of votive practices before the years before the Romans come. But yes, some of them absolutely are from that period, and it's really hard not to see them in the context of the story of Tacitus and the invasion
wow. So you grew up on a relatively small island, and then you've come to a bigger one. That's still an island. So you've obviously had a deep connection with the sea, and that's led to writing A Sea Witch's Companion: Practical Magic of Moon and Tides. Just come out via Hale Publishing. And obviously, this sounds like something that you've had to write to me, from the way you've spoken about your love of the sea and the love of magic and the connection between magic and the sea and the moon and the tides. You were never not going to write a book like this. That's
absolutely 1,000,000% accurate, Dave.
Yeah.
And I think, I say it in several places in the book, but I've witchcraft, paganism for me are just, they're where I fit. They're wonderful. They're the most important things there are. That spiritual path for me is kind of everything. But one of the things I never wasn't quite me was that much of paganism, it's so much a land-based spirituality, which is lovely. The worship in the woods and the forest and on the mountains, wonderful, but the sea doesn't seem to feature very much. So yes, it is a book I had to write, but I also wanted to make sure that there could be that sort of consciousness, because how can you think of the moon without the tides? Even if you're not by the sea, the tides affect us all wherever we are on the planet. So yes, it had to be done, and I would really, really love to see more recognition within paganism of the magic of the sea and what it can bring, and also what we need to do as responsible humans at the moment, because we are making a mess of the sea. We're making a mess of everything.
But, So there's a lot of woodland magic, like you say. There's lots of, the hern, the hunter, the horned god,
It's wonderful.
Which is wonderful, absolutely. But we, particularly for ourselves, we live on an island. You grew up on the smaller island, and there are islands all around this island. And so, and there is a huge amount of folklore all around the coastal areas, all around this Britain. And of course, you have you have Cornwall, and I think you live in Devon now. Is that right? So
I live in Devon. I live in East.
So you still have that connection to the sea. Obviously, growing up near the sea is going to have an impact on and an influence of how your magic works and develops in you as a witch. But was there any kind of one particular moment where the sea just said, you are a sea witch, or how you would describe yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is an approximate statistic, but no one in the British Isles has lived more than 80 miles from the sea.
Mm.
And I went to art school in the English Midlands, in Nottingham, in fact, which is a lovely place. But I did feel terribly landlocked. I was talking about this with a friend yesterday, actually. From the age of about 4, I could feel the physical effect of the tide in my body. And I thought that's just what everyone did. And I think everyone can if they want to develop that sensibility. But being so far from the sea was difficult. So the first opportunity I got, I went back to Anglesey, went home to make work. So on the 21st of December 1976, because I've been a filmmaker most of my life and made my first film, and it was of myself walking into the sea wearing a red leotard, making a piece of work about the sea, the moon, and menstruation. And because I was quite well known for that work in the 1980s, it was exhibited a lot, and that was the first piece I did. It was cold. It was frost on the beach, and that was the moment. As I made that walk and as I stepped into the sea,
yeah,
it was a huge connection made.
Yeah.
And then within a couple of months, I'd had this extraordinary visionary dream of Ariane Rod. I met Ariane Rod in a very lucid dream. So yeah, I felt claimed by the sea at that point, and kind of not stopped since, really.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say I've not done that magic of the woodlands and the mountains and the cornfields, because I have, and I love it. But it's just the sea is the most fundamental thing for me behind everything. It's that tidal rhythm and the relationship with the moon, and the moon as goddess.
I think I'm the same. I was born in Cornwall, but we moved away when I was very, very young, and I have memories of going back there with my parents for holidays and things like that. But I've always gravitated towards the sea wherever I am, and I've lived next to the sea here in Brighton for years and years now, and I think when I want to find peace, there's a certain peace I will get from the woodland, particularly in the spring, when there are bluebells, and it's just incredible, but I think I can go to the sea at any time and feel magic in any weather and in any season. Like the sea right now, the last few days have just been so choppy and powerful.
Oh yes, I've been there. I was there this morning, and
yeah. And then you go there other times, and it's like just so calm and peaceful. But the connection and the magic is really there all the time. If I want peace, I will take my mandolin or whatever down to the sea and just sit there and play my music next to the sea.
The first time I talked to you properly, that is what you were doing.
Yeah.
I remember it at Boscastle.
Oh yes.
Just after the day after a conference that I helped to organise.
Yeah.
It was the first time I talked. There was this lovely sound coming from the cliff top. I walked up there, and there you were.
But that's my communication. That's the way I communicate with spirits and things.
I give things to the sea all the time. So it's not just the peace. It's if I'm feeling bad or things are difficult, that's my mother. I can go to.
Amazing.
Find comfort and peace.
And there's so many different spirits of the sea as well. From different. Different cultures and stories and myths and legends. Is there any particular spirit of the sea that speaks to you? out of all of those.
Spirit as opposed to deity.
Well, either or both,
Because in terms of deities, it is Ariane Rod and that particular landscape that I come from. I mean, I suppose in the book written quite a lot about the folklore of the sea, and I think I think the Silkies, the seal people, that idea of the beings who can live on land with us but are seals in the sea, I find very powerful. I also love the idea that you find in, I was going to say Irish stories, but it's not, it's Irish belief about the great waves of these islands that are magical beings in their own right, that you can hear and feel coming from many miles away, that work that way. And I find a great connection with the ideas that you find in each of the Celtic countries about drowned lands and the spirits that were lost in their Soca East in Brittany, Lyonesse, and close to home, Cantragoilo and Tino Helig. And they're interesting. I know I don't know if this is a digression, but in Victorian times, there's great vogue in antiquities for finding these lost lands around the coast of Wales and saying, well, these must have been inundated within recent times. And I found out that they weren't. The most of those lost lands that we know are there, like Cantragoilo and Tino Helig, would have gone underwater probably around the time that Barclodia de Gowras was built in the Neolithic.
Wow.
You can prove that from the geological record and the time that the Menai Straits happened.
Formed, yeah.
So how, those legends.
Yeah. And you've got the Doggerland as well. The Doggerland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was that gradual process of sea level rise after the Ice Age that inundated those lands. I mean, there are more recent ones, but those ones, that's when they think they happened. So those stories are a very ancient part of our culture. So I suppose it's all those things, but I think one spirit or if you like, a deity that I became much more involved with writing the book was Dalan Elton, the son of the wave, because I felt I'd written an awful lot about the goddesses of the sea and looked at how they function in different cultures, different names, different ways that they happen around the world. And I felt a bit sad for the boys, really, because most of the classical sea gods and the ones back in that part of history were just really terrifying figures. Poseidon,
yes,
presides over earthquakes and disasters and what have you. And I was really thinking, well, is there a space for a different kind of masculine inspired deity? So I did a lot of work with Dylan Elton and I have a meditation for him in the book.
Yes.
And yeah, he's one of those figures who, in terms of that context of the Mabinogion, he's there very briefly, tiny little sub-paragraph in the story of Arianrod. But there were obviously many, many, many more stories about him because there are little references to him, lots of poetry in the stanzas of the graves. There's a beautiful piece about where the grave of Dylan is on the beach. It's in Buna and Llyn, where you can go find it. And so he was obviously a widely recognised figure, but that sort of cultural context, we've lost a lot of it. So Dylan I'd become very, very fond of, because for me, I can link to him as a spirit that cares for the sea and cares for the sea creatures, and is lovely to work with in that way. No way ever broke beneath him.
That's right. I love that paragraph, and it's so frustrating because you can tell, can't you, that there's more stories about him.
Yeah,
but they've gone. I mean, literally, and it was his fate to be slain by his uncle of Gavanon, and that's kind of it, you know. So I'm going to be starting the 4th branch next year, and
wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful.
and so I just really feel like I want to make that interaction a little bit more powerful and make something a little bit more of Dullan of the Waves, you know. Yes, definitely.
Because I suppose, stories that they become so well known and so commonplace that we think, oh, we don't need to tell everyone that. Everyone knows it. And then 700 or 800 years later, clodhoppers like us come along, and of course we don't, and we go, "Oh, is this what happened?" But in the end, what you do, the best way that you do it is you go out there to the seashore, to the rock pools, and you say, "Please come and talk to me.
Absolutely.
Please come and meet me, and make yourself open and willing." And that's where this process of re-enchantment.
Yes,
if these academics call it, that we are all part of, which actually I think is a wonderful word. That's what we're all about, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think the way that you do that is wonderful, because it doesn't. It's very sad that we don't have those stories anymore, but new ones will reveal themselves. That's part of what you're doing.
That's right. If these spirits exist, and I believe they do, they don't just exist in story, and they don't just exist in the pages of books. They exist in their own right, connected with the elements and forces that they're connected with in their stories. So if you really want to get to know, so I've always said, if you really want to know the power of the horned god, go and watch the deer during the rut. Then or if you want to understand the Morrigan, go and watch crows, and just spend hours watching crows, and you'll learn her energy through those birds and animals,
But you'll meet them as well.
Yeah.
They will reveal themselves to you. You have to give it a lot of time. You have to dedicate yourself to it, but they'll be there for you.
Yeah.
You'll meet them, So that, I guess that's the better way. Yeah.
So if you had, obviously I would recommend anyone get this book, because I've read it and it's fantastic. If there was somebody listening to this who wanted to develop a deeper connection with the sea, a deeper spiritual connection with the sea, physical connection with the sea, is there anything that you would say to them? Go and do this.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because I think that for me, magic is always experiential and physical, as well as enjoyed in the brain and in the psyche. And I think it's when we bring the mental and the psychic together with the physical, when we get rid of the split between mind and body, that the best things happen. And that often those things are very simple, but also very profound at the same time. So, and I hopefully suggest a lot of ways to do this in the book. But what I would start by doing? I would start by finding a place that you like by the sea, arriving there at low tide, and staying there quietly with eyes and ears and all your senses open till high tide for 6 hours. That's how I'd start. And just being a receptor to what happens to you.
Yeah.
That's how I'd start.
And listen and watch. And my favourite bird is a seagull. And I know there isn't such thing as a seagull, because there's herring gulls, there's black gulls. I guess it's the herring gulls, because people call them shite hawks here. I think they do in the West as well. In the West. But I just get so much joy watching the gulls.
Sometimes they're called grockle hawks.
Grockle hawks.
Because of their predilection for taking holidaymakers, fish and chips and biting.
But I get such joy watching the gulls. And they are such an integral part of the sea. So in fact, if I'm away and I call Kerry and I hear over the phone the calling of gulls, I just have this such longing for home. That's the sound of home for me.
How fabulous!
Yeah, and so a spiritual connection begins with that, with going to the sea, spending 6 hours from low tide to high tide, senses open, eyes open, ears open, just touching, smelling the ocean, all those things.
Tasting salt on your tongue.
Exactly. But as well as that sort of connection, you're very keen to say that there's another connection, that's as guardianship of the ocean. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I wouldn't want anyone to think that all we can do is sit by the sea and make spells and everything will be okay, because we've done horrendous damage to the oceans, and we know that now. And I think a lot of people are trying to put it right. But I would encourage everyone who loves the sea, alongside the magic, to do practical stuff. I mean, every time I go to work magic on the beach, which I do a lot, I do a beach clean first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tiny thing, but it's really important. And I'm trying to do everything I can in my lived life to not to contribute any further to the pollution of the ocean. So that's all the usual things. We know about this, don't we?
Mm.
Try and eliminate single-use plastic from your life, and certainly trying to eliminate throwing it away. Here down in the southwest, there are some fantastic environmental charities and campaigning organisations that work with the sea. I am particularly fond of Surfers Against Sewage, who I think do an absolutely brilliant job. So you can, if you are motivated to do so, you can engage with them. Campaign. Look, we know that the water companies are pouring millions of gallons of excrement and other waste into the sea in this country all the time. Get out there and campaign, make your voice known about it. There's so many things you can do. Different things will be right for different people, and I completely accept that different people will feel differently about these. But I think that magic has to be allied to practical action, actually, because we exist in all the worlds.
It's a congruency, isn't it? The practical aspect of support of the actual physical ocean then backs up your magic, and it also works the other way around as well, and they walk hand in hand with each other. And it's our kind of correspondences, isn't it? It's the way we strengthen the magic. And absolutely, yeah. Well, Lavanna, thank you so much for coming on to DruidCast and talking to me. I have got a copy of your book to give away as a prize for the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute delight talking to you.
You're very welcome, and I hope I see you. I mean, it's nice to see you on Zoom, but I could do with saying hello in person. It's been a long time.
I know.
Crazy, 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 crazy times.
Always a pleasure to talk to Lavanna, and after the interview just now you heard Go from the new EP Howbeit from Weird Tides. Absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for sending that in, and keep those songs coming, my friends. I love hearing your new music. However, this music means we are approaching the end of the show, but before I go, let's have the results of December's competition. The prize was 2 CDs and a book. David Bramwell gave us a copy of the Cult of Water book and CD, and a copy of Oddfellows Casino CD, Burning Burning. And the question I asked was, David's journey that led to the book and CD The Cult of Water began walking the banks of a river in the north of England. What is the name of that river? Well, the answer is the River Don. And the first name drawn from the hat and winner of that great prize is Zoe Salmon from Gloucestershire. Congratulations, Zoe. Those prizes will be with you very soon. The prize this month is a copy of Lavanna Morgan's book, A Sea Witch's Companion. And the question I'd like you to answer is, what is the name of the goddess from the Mabinogion who was Lavanna's first spiritual connection to the sea and who has stayed with her throughout her journey? What is the name of the goddess from the Mabinogion who was Lavanna's first spiritual connection to the sea and who has stayed with her throughout her journey? Email your answer along with your full postal address to podcast@druidry.org, and one of you will win that brilliant book. Well, my friends, that is a show. I will see you back here next month for DruidCast episode 189. But until then, have a blessed Imbolc to everyone here in the Northern Hemisphere, and a wonderful Lunasa to our friends down under. Until next time, I wish you all peace and blessed be. Goodbye.